It begins in silence, the kind of silence that comes not from calm, but from pressure. You feel the weight of what must be done, the budget review, the workout, the early bedtime, the decision to say no to something that once brought comfort. And in that moment, discipline doesn't feel like growth. It feels like grief. Grief over what you're giving up, over how hard it is to do what you know is right, when every nerve wants the easy thing instead. This is the trap. We resist the very habits that are trying to rescue us. We say we want peace, but flinch at the discomfort required to build it. The day you need structure the most is the day your soul craves release. And so you delay, you compromise, you tell yourself tomorrow. But tomorrow doesn't come clean, it comes heavier. Because the crisis we avoid today collects interest. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is endurable, then endure it." He wasn't glorifying pain. He was giving it a role. Pain, when chosen with intention, becomes purpose. It becomes a forge. It tempers your character. And what feels unfair in the moment often becomes the very thing that protects you when life turns cold and real. We live inside the conflict between short-term comfort and long-term collapse. Skip the small discomfort now, and you borrow a larger one from the future. You miss the workout, and a year later, your body aches not from effort, but neglect. You avoid the spreadsheet, and soon you can't breathe when rent is due. You say, "Just this once," and then one becomes a rhythm, a reflex. Daniel Kahneman named this tendency present bias. The mind exaggerates how painful now feels and shrinks the consequences of later. But later isn't theoretical. Later is a job loss. Later is a health scare. Later is waking up and realizing you're living someone else's life, built on habits that promised ease but delivered erosion. So we come to this image, the warrior who trains before the war, the cold air of morning, the repetition, the sweat that no one sees. That is what discipline is. It feels punishing until the day it saves you. When the unexpected comes, when chaos knocks, you don't panic. You stand, because you've met pain before. You trained with it, and now it stands beside you, not against you. Discipline hurts, yes, but it never harms. It asks something from you now so that life doesn't take everything from you later. That is the price of peace. Discomfort paid in advance. It doesn't start with catastrophe. It starts with something small. A skipped deposit, a delayed apology, a purchase you didn't need but couldn't resist. These are not loud failures. They are soft neglects, quiet enough to ignore, gentle enough to repeat. But every time you do, something slowly shifts beneath the surface. Your standards bend, your structure weakens, and what was once a clear boundary becomes a forgotten suggestion. This is how indiscipline creeps in. Not with dramatic collapse, but with what behavioral science calls normalcy drift. The silent slide from exception to routine. You once told yourself it was just this one night, just this one splurge, just this one break in routine. But now, without realizing, the exception has become the rule. The savings plan is a memory. The schedule is noise. The goals are fog. Seneca warned, "He who indulges himself more than is just will soon regret it." And that regret rarely arrives immediately. It shows up later when the debt compounds. Not only the financial kind, but the emotional one. The cost of living below your own standards isn't just numbers. It's the shame that builds quietly, the erosion of self-trust. You stop believing your own promises, and that disbelief eats you from the inside. We underestimate the power of what we avoid. A missed meditation seems like nothing. A forgotten workout feels trivial. But avoidance is not neutral. It accumulates. And when life tests you, you won't rise to your intentions. You will fall to the patterns you practiced, or didn't. That's why discipline must be tracked not only in action, but in absence. Start a quiet record. Write down what you avoid each day. No judgment, just awareness. That is the Discipline Deficit Journal, a mirror for your attention. You'll begin to see how often your peace is postponed, not by crisis, but by little comforts that rob you silently. Because the cost of indiscipline is not immediate ruin. It's slow disconnection. It's waking up to a life that feels out of sync, not because of one big mistake, but because of dozens of small ones no one saw, not even you, until now. There's a strange lie we've been taught, that comfort is the goal, that ease is the evidence of alignment. But comfort, unexamined, is not peace. It's anesthesia. And like all anesthesia, it wears off. When it does, you wake up, not healed, but delayed, not strengthened, but stalled. We confuse comfort with health, but some comforts are hollow. Some peace is fake. True growth often begins in discomfort. Not the kind that crushes, but the kind that calls you forward. The tension of waking early when the bed is warm, of budgeting when your impulses scream, of speaking truth when silence feels safer. We label that discomfort as suffering, but it isn't. It's signal. Your soul asking for recalibration. Your body reminding you what integrity feels like. That ache in your chest when you procrastinate. That's not punishment. That's the compass trying to guide you back. To name discipline as pain is to misread its nature. Behavioral science calls it misattribution of discomfort. We feel the burn of self-control and assume something's wrong. But in reality, something's right. Marcus Aurelius captured it simply. The obstacle is the way. The thing you are resisting may be the very thing that will restore you. Not immediately, but deeply. Try mapping it. Every pain, every resistance. What is it asking of you? The budget is asking for honesty. The workout is asking for courage. The silence is asking for reflection. Each discomfort is a teacher, a whisper of the virtue you're being invited to embody. The goal is not to avoid pain. The goal is to discern its purpose, because some pain is poison, but some is medicine. And the moment you stop fleeing discomfort, you begin to feel something else rising in its place. Clarity, direction, quiet strength. Pain, when listened to with wisdom, becomes one of your most faithful allies. It shows you where you still need to grow and who you're still meant to become. At first, discipline feels like being denied, like you're saying no to life while others say yes. You see someone buy without flinching, indulge without pausing, drift through their days and still laugh. And you wonder, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I choosing restraint when the world celebrates release? This is the illusion, the lie that freedom comes from always choosing what feels good in the moment. But real freedom isn't about having no limits. It's about having the right ones. Discipline is not the absence of pleasure. It's the presence of sovereignty. When you practice self-control, you're not reducing joy. You're refining it. You're choosing what nourishes instead of what numbs. Imagine a sculptor. She chisels away not because she hates the marble, but because she loves what lives beneath it. The process looks like loss, but it's actually creation. Every cut brings her closer to something true. That's what your self-restraint is doing. Cutting away the noise, the cravings, the chaos, until what's left is solid, purposeful, clean. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And mastery doesn't mean domination. It means knowing. Knowing your impulses without being ruled by them. Knowing your desires without being owned by them. That's real power. Not in control over others, but in command of your own response. But it takes time. There will be days when discipline feels like deprivation, when you miss out on what everyone else seems to be enjoying. But slowly, a new feeling arrives. Quiet at first, then unmistakable. Peace. Not the kind bought at checkout, the kind that settles into your bones. A calm that doesn't depend on the world behaving. Track it. Look at your life this week. Where did self-control give you freedom? Maybe it was not checking your phone and sleeping better. Maybe it was walking past temptation and feeling proud instead of guilty. These are your real wins. They don't shout, they build. Discipline doesn't make life smaller, it makes your soul bigger. Because when you stop chasing everything, you finally have the strength to choose what matters most. We all have visions, goals that shine quietly in the distance, a healthier body, a stable budget, a life with more calm than chaos. But goals are not ladders we climb in the moment of crisis. They are anchors, only useful if the rope is strong. And that rope is built not from motivation, but from standards. Daily, consistent, often invisible standards. The mistake is thinking you will rise when it matters, that you'll make the right decision when it counts. But the truth is, you will default. You will fall to the level of what you've practiced, what you've permitted, what you've normalized. And that is not failure, that is nature. The nervous system doesn't rise to the occasion. It returns to its training. This is the danger of living by hope, by intention, by "I'll do it later." Behavioral science calls it the planning fallacy. We overestimate what we'll do with time we haven't met yet. We say we'll save more next month, work out when things calm down, speak our truth when the mood feels right. But life rarely makes space. You carve it, and the carving happens now. Marcus Aurelius warned, "Don't waste what remains of your life." It's not always about having more time, it's about having more focus. And focus isn't built in bursts, it's sculpted through systems. Start with what I call the 3-fence standard. The first fence, what you never do. The non-negotiables, the boundaries that protect your peace. The second, what you always do. Rituals that keep you rooted even on your worst days. The third, what you reevaluate, because growth needs flexibility, not rigidity. These fences don't box you in, they hold you up. They carry you through fatigue, through doubt, through the endless voice that says, maybe tomorrow. Because there are days when your energy won't show up, but your structure will. And that structure, those quiet, rehearsed standards, become your survival, your strength, your serenity. You don't need louder goals, you need quieter standards. The kind you practice when no one's watching, the kind you fall back on and forward into. There's a kind of protection you don't feel while it's working. It doesn't reward you with applause. It doesn't come with fireworks or standing ovations. It just waits, quietly, holding the line when everything else breaks. That's what discipline is. Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply loyal. Most people don't notice discipline until they're in danger and realize they're safer than expected. Not because life got easier, but because their past self made choices that built a cushion, an emergency fund, a strengthened body, a habit of emotional regulation. These aren't glamorous, they're not viral, but when the test comes, when the job disappears, when the relationship shakes, when the body gets tired, you feel them, you feel their worth. You may have heard stories like this. A man automated his savings for a decade. He never felt like he was being disciplined. He didn't brag, he didn't post spreadsheets. But when his company downsized and the paycheck vanished, he didn't panic. Because 10 years earlier, his quiet habits had planted roots. What saved him wasn't genius, it was consistency. This is the paradox. Discipline often looks like nothing, until it becomes everything. You don't thank your fire extinguisher daily, but when smoke fills the room, you're on your knees, grateful. That's how preparation works. It doesn't make you look good, it makes you ready. Think of it as your silent guardian. The behaviors that don't get credit because they prevent the need for crisis, the workouts that avoid illness, the budgeting that prevents begging, the reflection that stops regret. You don't see the storm because the roof held, but you built that roof. Honor these quiet victories. Track them. Not just what you achieved, but what you avoided. The argument that didn't explode because you paused. The overdraft that never happened because you planned. The shame you didn't carry because you acted in alignment. These are your invisible wins. They don't sparkle, but they shine when you need them most. That's discipline. Not the hero of the moment, but the architect of your survival. There comes a turning point, quiet, internal, often unspoken. A moment where you no longer see discipline as a punishment, but as a prayer, a ritual of care, a structure not meant to cage you, but to carry you. What once felt like resistance begins to feel like reverence for your time, for your energy, for the life you are slowly, silently building. Discipline is not about control. It's about connection, a daily return to your values, even when they feel distant. A way of saying, I matter enough to protect myself from myself. And that protection isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it's exhausting. But slowly, you begin to feel the weight shift. What once felt like denial begins to feel like devotion. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." And there's something liberating about that. You don't need applause. You don't need to explain. You only need to act in accordance with what you know sustains you, especially when no one is watching, especially when the world feels too loud to think clearly. Modern wisdom mirrors this. Morgan Housel said, "Savings is the gap between your ego and your income." That gap, that sacred space between impulse and action, is where discipline lives. It guards your peace. It builds your future. It keeps you from becoming a stranger to your own potential. And if something you do today feels painful, but will bring you clarity, stability, or alignment later, it's not pain. It's preparation. A seed planted in stillness. A future storm already accounted for. If this message echoed something inside you, even in a quiet corner, give it room to stay. Subscribe, like. Share it with someone who is walking the silent road of self-mastery. And in the comments, write, "I choose discipline." This video is for educational purposes only. Always consider your circumstances with care. Stay devoted to the invisible. It always becomes visible in time.